It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. Welcome to the Happy Families podcast. I look forward to Wednesdays every week because I get to talk to interesting people about their lives and parenting and what we can learn about making life better. Today, having a conversation with Sharon Stoliar. Sharon is a registered midwife and registered nurse and has recently written a book called Scars of Gold. The book comes out in the next couple of months and I'm kind of getting a sneak peek into Sharon's life and her story about birth trauma. Sharon's been in touch and has shared her personal story in this book, and it made me think this is a conversation that we just don't have enough. Sharon, welcome to the Happy Families podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Sharon, you've shared your story in this book, Scars of Gold, and I've been privileged to be able to read a little bit of it. Would you just give us a brief version of what you went through from a trauma perspective as you went through your first labour as a registered midwife, somebody who knows what's supposed to be happening and knows how it's all supposed to go?
Yeah, look, I think that was an interesting dimension for me, especially afterwards when I reflected on my experience. Going in through the labour, I knew what was happening to me. I was really fortunate in that my midwife who looked after me during labour was also a friend, and she knew what to do, how to advocate for me. But what happened, I had an emergency cesarean, and you know what? That was all fine because I knew at that point there was no other option. So I was able to accept that.
This is one of those things where people have this desire, this dream that they're going to go in with their birth plan and everything's going to go exactly the way it's supposed to go, and they're going to breathe through it. They're going to have all the support they need, and the baby's going to be born exactly the quote unquote right way. And even as a midwife, you don't get to choose, do you? Sometimes things happen, and all of a sudden you're in there with the epidural block, and you're having the emergency Caesar. This was not part of your plan.
That's right. The only plan I actually had was to push my baby out and go home in 4 hours. That was legitimately the only thing I desperately wanted. Because for me, being in a postnatal ward is work for me. That's where I worked. And
you don't want to be hanging out there after you've had the baby, right? Let's just get out of here.
No, I don't want to hear buzzers. I don't want to, feel like I'm at work when I'm transitioning into motherhood, especially for the first time. Unfortunately, I ended up in hospital for 15 days after I had my son. You know, I was able to accept everything, even the cesarean. That for me was fine.
So what happened after the C-section?
So what happened was I had this very rare complication, which at the time no one knew what it was. I had this pain in my leg that just started getting worse, and my right leg was swelling. Often after cesarean, it's normal to have a bit of swelling in both legs, what we call edema. My right leg was markedly more swollen, and throughout the afternoon, it was just getting worse and worse. I was complaining of the pain. It was visible that I was deteriorating, but I wasn't taken seriously. I felt I had that expectation that, especially because I'm a midwife, to get up, get on with it. You know, what are you complaining about? You know what to do. But by the time the doctor came to see me, I was dismissed again. She just said, "Oh, you must have bumped it in labour. You must have bumped it on the bed rail going from the labour room to the operating theatres." And I knew I hadn't. I think being dismissed when I was saying I hadn't made me second guess myself.
It's almost like the medical establishment embarked on a little gaslighting procedure against you.
Absolutely.
You know what your experience is. You're a midwife, and it makes me think as I hear you say that you've got all of this medical experience. You're a clinical midwife. You're used to being in these situations, and you're being dismissed. What must it be like for the average non-medically trained mum who is going through labour for the first or even for the sixth time? Something goes wrong, complains about it, and there's that ongoing dismissal. I mean, it's a terrible indictment on the medical profession generally, isn't it, when you have a serious situation like this?
Absolutely. And, when I was in that bed, without my work uniform on, without my work badge, I just suddenly felt like stripped of all my power and identity. Who was I? I thought I was this knowledgeable midwife and, professional. And here I was, and I'm telling my healthcare providers, my maternity care providers, I'm in pain. This is not normal. Later on, having the midwife who looked after me in labor came to visit me, and I even asked her because I had doubted myself so much by then. And did I bump my leg? And she said, no, absolutely not. Nothing happened to your leg. And even after that, I was still dismissed. My pain just got worse and worse. And by the middle of the night, when it was so bad, and my mum was with me that night, she helped me take off the stockings that we put on our legs after having a cesarean, the compression
stockings, yeah.
Yeah, and instantly my leg ballooned. Oh my gosh, it just ballooned like right in front of my eyes. It was just agony, like nothing worked. They said, move the leg, put it on a pillow, heat pack, ice pack, nothing worked. I mean, at least in labor, you get a break. You get like a minute between the contractions at least. But this was just, I have no words. It was exquisite pain, agony. And it was so swollen, you could put a fist into my ankle and the imprint would still be there.
It's some bump you must have had that doctor said. It must have been some crazy bump.
Exactly. And, I had a neurologist come in to see me and he said, oh, you must have compartment syndrome, get an MRI. But then the other doctors said, we've never seen it after having a baby. It can't possibly be compartment syndrome. So it can't be. So they just dismissed that option. And I went on and on and on, unable to walk, unable to weight bear, needing to use bedpans to go to the toilet. I mean, I was a 26-year-old young mum in bed with a brand new baby. Like my whole sense of self was shaken, all while the hormones of new motherhood just raging through me. I was crying all the time in those 15 days, just all the time. The only thing that kept me going was my beautiful son that I had there. But eventually on day 10, I had another MRI, which confirmed I had in fact had acute compartment syndrome. And by then it was too late to do the fasciotomy, which is the cut into the fascia of the muscle to relieve the pressure, because by then all the damage had already been done. And so they had to just treat me conservatively by then. And I just always think, had they listened to me at the start when I said, no, this is not normal, I'm in pain, you need to do something, the morphine's not working. Sometimes I think, well, maybe I could have got the treatment I needed then and there, and maybe I wouldn't be dealing with the consequences that I'm still dealing with now. I have a dead nerve from my knee down to my big toe. My balance has been significantly affected over these 10 years. I still need to see a physio twice a week. Still, if someone bumps into me now, and I'm not expecting it, I will fall. I still have falls. There's been significant physical consequences for me.
I'm speaking with Sharon Stoliar. Sharon is the author of the forthcoming book, Scars of Gold. Sharon, you're an intelligent human. You've got a registered midwife qualification. You're an RN. You have a Master's of Public Health and Master of International Public Health. And you're currently enrolled in a PhD. After the break, we're going to talk about birth trauma, what it actually is, the various ways that it can show up, because there are so many ways that it can, and the project that you've embarked on to help mothers who have been through their own forms of birth trauma to get the help that they need. If you could read your daughter's mind, what would you hear? Teen girls who are anxious about fitting in and struggling to find happiness, and they need you, mum and dad, to be there as they tackle these challenges and much more. Misconnection is the cutting-edge, science-backed book you need to get deep into your daughter's mind and connect about the things that matter to her. Available at the Happy Families shop online. It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. I'm speaking with Sharon Stoliar, who's the author of the forthcoming book, Scars of Gold. She's just shared her traumatic birth story. Sharon, birth is traumatic. Like, childbirth is a trauma in and of itself. What it does to the body, the way that psychology and physiology are affected by this. It's a really big deal to have a baby. Having sat in a birthing suite and supported my wife through 6 labours, 5 of which were what you would call a natural birth with minimal pain relief, and then one that ended up being an emergency C-section. I've witnessed the immensity of the unspeakable miracle of what this can be, but obviously it is not the miraculous, joyful, beautiful, perfect moment that I've experienced for every woman, for every family that goes through this. Can you tell us exactly what birth trauma is?
Yes, absolutely. Look, first of all, I am so happy to hear that your family has experienced positive births. It's really nice to hear that.
Well, I say that. I mean,
especially
Kylie might not say that, but I say that in that we were crying and laughing and we were happy at the end of it all, and there were no long-term repercussions. Oh, well, minimal long-term repercussions. There's always some, right?
Yeah, of course. But, birth is supposed to be a joyful, happy event. Yes, of course, it's a physically difficult, for women, they're pushing a baby out of their body or having a cesarean. But the statistics show us that anywhere from 20 to 48% of women around the world are describing their birth as traumatic. In Australia, it's 1 in 3 births. But
that's staggering. That's such a large percentage.
Absolutely. And a research study in Queensland, actually, quite a large study, found it to be as high as 45.5% of all births. That's almost 1 in 2 births. And it's a really worrying statistics when you compare it to other diseases and conditions that have a spotlight on it in society. Birth trauma is neglected, and we really need to do something about that.
So how do we define it, though? How do we actually, because if we've got somebody who's saying, yes, I think it was traumatic, that's kind of different to somebody saying we've met the criteria for what birth trauma actually is. Do we have a clear definition of what it is, or does it simply come down to a subjective sense of trauma?
Yes. So birth trauma really is in the eye of the beholder.
Okay.
So in fact, a lot of people don't know what birth trauma is, and many people mistakenly believe that it only relates to a physical injury that happened during the birth. But birth trauma it's often a psychological response. In essence, it's any form of physical or psychological injury or damage that can occur during or after childbirth. It's really up to how the mother perceives her birth was. Some women will meet the full criteria for PTSD, but even though not all women do develop that, we have to recognize that if we've got almost half the population of birthing women in Australia saying their birth is traumatic, well, what is it? Why? And what's causing it? Women can say their birth was traumatic because of tearing, because of an unexpected cesarean, like you were talking about before. They had a birth plan and it didn't go to plan, and they weren't expecting that. That can be traumatic. What causes trauma for someone can be very different for another birthing woman. Maybe if I wasn't a midwife, having that emergency cesarean might have been traumatic for me. But for me, it wasn't traumatic that I had a cesarean despite planning to push the baby out.
So I may lose a whole lot of support for what I'm about to say, and I want to be sensitive. I know I'm a male. I know that I don't have to go through this, and therefore, in some ways, my question here may be unfair and it could be completely inappropriate. But I'm going to ask it anyway. The cynic might say birth is traumatic. It always has been and it always will be. And maybe the numbers are wrong at 45%. Another cynic might say, well, we're just not resilient like we used to be. I mean, I know from being through this with my wife 6 times, and obviously she's the one that did it, that we have shared and laughed about the traumatic birth stories that we experienced with our kids and used that word fairly loosely and fairly blithely to describe the absolute terror that can wash over a woman and her partner as she goes through that birthing process. I mean, there have been times where I've looked at Kylie and thought, I don't think she can make it. I don't think she can do it. And it's been terrifying for me. I can't imagine what she's gone through. I believe that trauma, as much as we've laughed about it, may be an appropriate word for almost every birth. And so part of me wonders, are we pathologizing and traumatizing a natural but actual traumatic process?
I think, yes, it might be traumatizing physically because, you're going through that massive physiological process.
Yeah, because there's a tear or because there's just there's something that pops somewhere.
But You know, the research shows us that when women have been well supported during their labour and birth, and they've had respectful maternity care, it doesn't matter the outcome, they still perceive their experience as being positive.
Right.
So, and they come out feeling empowered and joyful, and they often transition to motherhood better than those who come out feeling they had a traumatic birth. And I think we need to come back to the impact of what true birth trauma.
So Sharon, that's a really, really helpful answer to my question, because in spite of the quote unquote trauma that Kylie's experienced as we've gone through these 6 labours, we've always, except in one case, felt that we've had really supportive medical staff. I've been well trained as well as a support person, in that I know how to guide Kylie through those contractions, how to time them, how to remind her that it's a wave, it's washing in, it's washing out, how to keep her lips loose so that she can remain loose through the birthing process itself. I've been well trained in that. In fact, I've just written a book about that, because dads need to have that knowledge so that they can be the support that's necessary. And I love what you've said, so that the overall experience doesn't reflect a traumatic moment. And I think that's the great. I love the way you've answered that. It's so wonderfully helpful. Sharon, our time is done. But if people want to. I know it goes so fast, doesn't it? If people want to communicate more with you about your book, about your experience, about their experience, if they want to be part of your Ending Birth Trauma project, or be involved with the PhD research that you're doing right now as you pursue your doctorate, what's the best way for people to contact you and learn about your book, get a copy of it, and maybe even contribute to the conversation that you're creating?
I have 2 websites, endingbirthtrauma.com if you want to receive updates on when the book will be released and get pre-release discounted rate. You can sign up on endingbirthtrauma.com, or I can be contacted on sharonstoliar @gmail.com.
Okay, so let me repeat that. We've got Sharon Stoliar, that's STOLIAR @gmail.com. You've got the website endingbirthtrauma.com, and you've also got Instagram Ending Birth Trauma. We will link to all of those methods that people can contact you in our podcast show notes. Sharon, what a delight to have this conversation with you. I think that in spite of my potentially insensitive question, you've done a really great job in explaining what we can do to reduce birth trauma and help mothers to have positive birth experiences. And I think that your book, Scars of Gold, is going to resonate with so many people. Good luck with the book when it comes out. And thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rollon from Bridge Media, and Craig Bruce is our executive producer. If you want more info about anything we've talked about today, we'll link to everything in the show notes. That's Scars of Gold, the book, the website endingbirthtrauma.com, and Sharon's contact details in case you want to continue the conversation with her. And if you'd like more info about making your family happier, you can visit happyfamilies.com.au.